Welcome to the fourth episode of our show, The Second Sex. We're exploring Simone de Beauvoir's really groundbreaking work and its lasting impact.
Absolutely. It's still so relevant today.
It really is. So today we're diving deep into Chapter 2, The Psychoanalytical Point of View. We're focusing specifically on pages 73 to 86.
Right. This is where she directly confronts psychoanalysis, which was, a huge intellectual force at the time.
Exactly. It was trying to explain the nature of the position of women, and Beauvoir had, well, she had some thoughts.
She certainly did. She unpacks their theories, but she definitely finds them lacking, often problematic even.
Yeah. So our mission here is to kind of distill those core arguments, maybe find some surprising insights, and really get why she spent so much time dissecting these views.
She used crucial groundwork for her own arguments later on.
Okay, let's get into it. So Beauvoir starts by laying out their perspective, the psychoanalytical view on femininity. What were the key ideas she was looking at?
Well, she really hones in on how central anatomy was for them, specifically the presence or absence of the penis. That was seen as, like, the primary driver in psychological development.
Which immediately makes you think of Freud and...
Penis envy, yes,
Mhm.
exactly. That concept is, right at the heart of the Freudian view she's examining.
Right, penis envy. Such a loaded term. So how did psychoanalysis, according to Beauvoir's reading, use that idea to explain, well, everything else about female identity?
It branched out quite a bit. The theory suggested this anatomical difference as perceived lack was fundamental. It supposedly shaped core female traits. Things like passivity,
Passivity.
masochism even, and this strong orientation towards, well, domestic life and motherhood.
Mm.
The idea was this feeling of inferiority channeled development that way.
Wow. That's quite a leap from anatomy to, wanting to stay home. Beauvoir also mentions the Oedipus complex. How did they see that playing out differently for girls?
Yeah, the resolution was different. Psychoanalytical theory argued girls developed a weaker superego
Weaker?
because the fear of castration, which supposedly drives superego formation in boys, wasn't the same threat for girls, given they were seen as already, well, lacking.
Lacking the penis, right? It always comes back to that.
It does. And this weaker superego was then linked to supposed differences in morality, how they engaged with rules. It's fascinating how anatomy was used to justify these broad social observations.
It really is a chain of assumptions, isn't it? And it wasn't just personality, was it? She also looks at how they viewed female sexuality.
Oh, definitely. Psychoanalysis, as she presents it, put a lot of weight on the shift from clitoral to vaginal pleasure.
Yeah.
That was seen as the marker of, mature femininity,
Mature meaning.
meaning ready for procreation, essentially.
Hmm.
Vaginal pleasure through intercourse was the goal. If a woman remained focused on clitoral pleasure, it was sometimes seen as, like, developmental immaturity.
Okay. So you have these ideas about development, sexuality. How did that all tie into explaining women's place in society? The differences people saw between men and women.
Well, it provided a kind of scientific-sounding justification for the status quo, didn't it? By rooting everything in these early anatomical and psychological stages, it made the differences seem natural, predetermined almost.
So women's roles in the home, their perceived passivity, it's all just the logical outcome of their biology and psychology, according to this view.
That was the implication Beauvoir was dissecting, that it wasn't social, it was inherent.
Okay, so she's laid out their case pretty thoroughly. Now, the critique. Where does she start pushing back? What are her biggest issues?
Well, she doesn't just dismiss it out of hand, but her critique is sharp. The main thrust is against reducing female identity to just biology. That idea that anatomy is destiny. She fundamentally rejects that.
Yeah, that feels very Beauvoir, very existentialist. What else? Did she see other limitations? Biases?
Oh, definitely. She really questions how universal these Freudian concepts actually are. She argues quite strongly that culture and society play a much bigger role in shaping gender, shaping psychological differences, than psychoanalysis admitted.
So it's not a universal truth. It might just reflect a specific time and place.
Exactly. She points out it often ignores the huge diversity of women's experiences across different cultures and classes. It takes one specific model and tries to make it fit everyone.
And what about those feminine traits like passivity? Psychoanalysis often presented them negatively, or at least as secondary. How did Beauvoir reinterpret those?
That's a really key part of her argument. She suggests that maybe traits like passivity aren't innate psychological features at all. Maybe they're adaptations, responses to being in a subordinate position in society.
Ah, so not inherent, but learned or developed as a coping mechanism.
Precisely. It's a way of surviving when you don't have much power or opportunity for agency. That shifts the focus entirely away from blaming the individual's biology or psyche.
That makes so much sense. It's about the situation, the context. She also talks about a male bias within psychoanalysis itself.
Yes, a huge one. She argues the whole framework is often built on the male experience as the default, the norm.
Like the standard setting.
Exactly. And women are then measured against that standard and, well, often found lacking. Penis envy is the classic example, defining female experience by what it supposedly doesn't have compared to the male. Deviations from this male norm get pathologized.
So she flips it. Psychoanalysis sees these traits causing women's social roles, but Beauvoir says,
She says the social roles, the subordinate position, are the cause, and the psychological traits are often the effect. Psychoanalysis describes the symptoms of inequality as if they were the root cause.
that's a powerful reversal. It stops reinforcing the existing structure.
Right. It stops presenting social inequalities as somehow natural or psychologically inevitable.
And how does she feel psychoanalysis dealt with women's actual lives, their, subjective experiences, their ability to choose?
That was another major criticism. She felt it often failed to account for women's lived reality, their agency, the impact of their environment, by focusing so much on unconscious drives tied to anatomy in early childhood.
It kind of ignores the present, the actual world they live in.
In her view, yes. It overlooks the tangible constraints and possibilities of their lives and their capacity to make choices within that reality.
It feels like it creates this sense of inevitability. You're just programmed by these drives, and Beauvoir saw a danger in that.
A huge danger. Because if you present socially constructed differences as natural, as just how psychology works, you end up reinforcing the patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
You pathologize normal responses to difficult situations and discourage questioning the structures themselves.
Okay, so stepping back, what was the overall impact of this critique? How did it change feminist thinking?
Oh, it was massive. Really transformative. It was a key move away from purely biological or psychological explanations for why things were the way they were for women. It shifted the focus towards society, culture, history.
Paving the way for understanding gender as something constructed, not just given.
Exactly. Her insistence on looking beyond biology, on looking at the situation, was fundamental. It opened up whole new ways of thinking for feminist theory that followed.
And those ideas about social construction, the critique of biological essentialism, they still feel incredibly relevant today, don't they?
Absolutely. The debates about nature versus nurture, the way we understand gender identity. Beauvoir's arguments laid so much groundwork. Her engagement with psychoanalysis really highlights these ongoing questions.
So for someone reading this chapter today, what's the big takeaway? Why is it important to understand this back and forth with psychoanalysis?
Well, partly it's about understanding the context she was writing in. Psychoanalysis was this dominant force, and seeing her grapple with it, dissect it so carefully, shows you how important it is to critically examine any powerful framework, even one that seems scientific or objective.
Don't just accept the dominant narrative.
Right. Question the assumptions, and look for explanations that actually account for the complexity of lived experience, not just reduce it to biology or unconscious drives. It shows the foundation she was building for her own perspective.
So thinking about this for you, our listener, Beauvoir's deep dive here really shows the risks, doesn't it? The risks of using frameworks that might have hidden biases, that overlook the power of social context, especially when trying to understand women's experiences.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. By taking apart these influential theories, Beauvoir basically clears the ground. She makes space for her own existentialist feminist view.
Where women aren't just defined by biology.
Exactly, where they're defined by their choices, their actions, their projects within the constraints society places on them. Of course, it's about becoming, not just being what biology supposedly dictates.
Which leaves us with a question for you to think about. How much do the frameworks we rely on today, maybe in psychology, sociology, even everyday thinking, how much might they still carry biases that limit how we understand different people and their experiences?
Yeah, it's something to chew on. We definitely encourage you to revisit this chapter. Beauvoir's critical eye is still incredibly sharp and relevant to these ongoing debates about gender, identity, and, the power of social structures.
Definitely. Join us next time as we continue digging into the complexities of the second sex.